The viewpoints expressed on Night Fright are not necessarily those of the host, the staff, the sponsors, or the affiliate stations. Tonight's program may contain graphic themes or images. Viewer discretion is advised.
There is a time for question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Showtime. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Brent Holland. Welcome, one and all, to Night Fright. Have we got a great show for you tonight? We are revisiting Nikola Tesla, and we've got a great guest all the way from Calgary. But first of all, if you're just joining us, folks, get the coffee going, get the tea going, get a beverage of your choice going. We've got a great ride. We're going to be looking at a new television series that is being proposed about Nikola Tesla. And the fellow that's doing that is Stacy Fry. He's my guest tonight all the way from Calgary. Just let me read you a little bit about Stacy's career. In 2013, Bell Media National Fellowship winner, Mr. Fry has been in the entertainment publishing and digital media industries for over 20 years. It's funny, he only looks like he's 20, starting as the co-founder of Kootenai Co-op Radio. And I just want to give a shout out to all my friends in Kootenai Co-op Radio because, folks, when I started Night Fright in 2008 at a campus radio station in Sudbury, Ontario, CKLU, Kootenai Co-op was one of the first stations to step forward and syndicate Night Fright. How great is that? And here we have the co-founder of that very radio station with us tonight. In 2000, Mr. Fry moved to Vancouver, BC, where he established the media and publicity division of Granville Island Publishing. Then he moved on to Stash Magazine, a monthly showcase of the world's top visual effects, animation, and motion graphics from film, television, and commercials. As an associate publisher from 2006 to 2008, Mr. Fry helped transition the DVD magazine into the top industry online streaming magazine. He is founder and CEO of Maya Media, and we're going to talk about Nikola Tesla tonight and all things Tesla. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for such a glowing, intro. Are you able to hear me?
What'd you say? No,
Are you able to hear me?
I'm just teasing him.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Sorry,
good.
buddy. We're going to have some fun tonight. By the way, folks, I'm wearing my poppy. It is November, and it's Remembrance Day. I'm also sporting my cup, the Hornet. A friend of mine gave it to me who's stationed in Trenton, which is Canada's biggest military base. He's in charge of aerospace for Canada. Shout out to Nathan Burgess. Thank you, my friend. Okay, Mr. Tesla. What brought you to the point where you said this story needs to be told, and it needs to be told through the medium of television?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting story. I don't even remember exactly when I...
Was there something about Tesla in specific that kind of resonated with you?
Yeah. Actually, now I do recall exactly when it was that I came to Tesla, and that was when I read a book called The Coming Energy Revolution by Gene Manning. I since reached out to Gene and have got into, a lot of the sort of backyard studies and practical investigations are being done on any kind of, not necessarily, I don't like using the word free energy because it makes people think of perpetual motion, all these types of things. But I like to use the idea of open-ended fuel source. The idea...
How did Tesla come to create that, or the potential for that, if you will?
Yeah, it's funny because it's brought up a couple times. He brings it up in his own autobiography
Yeah.
where he talks about a particular professor that he was studying under in Graz, and he was demonstrating a dynamo that was just at that time they were learning that maybe they could generate electricity as well as propel electricity long distances using the dynamos. And this opened up a whole bunch of engineering possibilities, particularly around the ocean liners and their back and forth, as well as the trains and all that. And he was told, or he suggested in class that it might be possible to get rid of this sort of transformer that was sort of the go-between between these two devices, and then his professor misinterpreted what Tesla had said, and more or less ended up chiding him in front of the class, saying this is a perpetual motion scheme. And really what Tesla was thinking at the time was that he was interested in creating an alternating current. He already had it in his mind, just in that exact moment, that alternating current would be a way to get rid of this thing in front of these two devices, streamline the whole process, and come up with it. As far as wireless free electricity, it seems that the idea was more or less conceived in Europe and brought with him before he arrived in New York. And I believe it was 1 year before the Statue of Liberty went up, so I guess that's a way to tell exactly when he arrived.
Actually, it was 1884, but that's
yeah,
okay.
1884, exactly.
It's in that ballpark, without question.
He's in that ballpark. So he arrived with this idea that, well, initially his focus was on AC current and getting that whole new system established, and that was something that he...
Hang on to AC current for a second, but in my mind, I'm thinking in this day and age that electricity through the air is a possibility. When we think of all the... Because what AC electricity is, folks, it's negative, positive, and it's being pushed along like that. So where have we heard negative, positive, zeros and ones, if you will? Computers. We're using wireless technology right now for Skype. This is what we're using. That's flying through the air at zillions of miles an hour. In my mind, there's no reason why we couldn't focus electricity along those same lines and send it through the air and then just bump it up where we need it.
It's possible. It's entirely possible. The whole project at Wardenclyffe was designed for this. Now, just to be accurate, he was never really proposing electricity through the air. He was proposing to use his system to grab that electricity out of the upper atmosphere,
Right,
and then drive it through ground resonance on a carrier wave that he would create through the system in the tower at Wardenclyffe. And it's said that he was unsuccessful in that attempt. However, I tend to believe that he was successful at a smaller scale and then was intending to extrapolate on that and got caught up in that and the whole financing side of things, which prevented him from beating Morricone to the punch in the transmission of radio through air, which that's what J.P. Morgan had financed him to do at Wardenclyffe, and because he was scooped by Morricone, it is said that is the reason that J.P. Morgan pulled financing or wouldn't contribute more than he had originally said he would contribute to that project, because Tesla had more or less spent all that money because he wanted to go bigger than he originally planned at Wardenclyffe, and as a result ran into financial troubles. But certainly today one can understand how Tesla came to the idea. It's actually a story of his cat. He was petting his cat when he was a child, and he was petting it at night, and it was starting to create the static electricity. And he asked his father, what is that? And he said, well, it's just like the electricity you see in the sky, the lightning and all of that. And in true Tesla fashion, he asked, well, who's petting the earth? And then his father, who was an Orthodox priest, said, well, God, I believe. And this got him thinking about the upper atmospheres, I believe, at that point, and the whole origin of electricity as a phenomena in the sky, and that whole sort of leap. And it really, I think that's the first moment, even though he didn't realize it at that moment exactly, but I think that was the origin of the whole idea of wireless free electricity at that point.
I love that story, Stacy, and I was not aware of it. And I'm sure you're going to bring more of these stories out when you do the television. I was going to say document when you do the television series.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Now, just to stay in that realm a little bit, because Tesla, you had mentioned Wardenclyffe, which, folks, just to let you know, is a place that he built to do a lot of his experiments, and it was just a think tank for him, basically a place to go and work. And I'm thinking, with all these new ideas fluttering in, he must have ruffled a lot of feathers. And that brings me into thinking that there could have been some undermined conspiracies working against him.
Sure, yeah, the conspiracy angle is the easiest one to go to, for obvious reasons. I mean, once Tesla had spent all of J.P. Morgan's money and really revealed finally to Morgan what his true intentions were, there was a rift between them at that point. Because he didn't originally disclose, there's a lot of information to suggest he didn't originally disclose the true intention of Wardenclyffe and what his purpose was, because he was financed to transmit sound and visual information through the air across the Atlantic, and that's what J.P. Morgan was financing him for. And, you know, just sort of, actually I went to a documentary a debut in New York not too long ago. It was for a documentary. It's a very good documentary. It's specifically about Wardenclyffe. It taught me a lot of things I didn't know, and it's called Tower to the People. I believe that's the name of it, if I can remember correctly. Anyway, look that up, because when that comes out, or as it starts to come out more, it's an excellent eye-opener as to what Wardenclyffe was, and some of the conspiracies that are behind it, or potential conspiracies. Certainly once J.P. Morgan realized what Tesla was doing, but more to the point that he wanted more money now. And, you know, having once been not told fully disclosed what the tower was for, and then two, suddenly wanting twice as much money, now there's this enormous debt on Wardenclyffe, and Tesla was out there trying to drum up some more investors, and every time he got a new investor, he had to take that investor to J.P. Morgan to negotiate the terms on the debt and to get more money. Well, J.P. Morgan then just would take that investor and direct him into a new investment, as opposed to helping Tesla. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of speculation. I've also talked to other people who believe that Tesla, at some point during that whole process, which really started in Colorado, when he was starting to perfect this idea of wireless free energy, or at least come to terms with its possibility, and then taking it to Wardenclyffe later, there may have been a point at that moment in time, or during that period of time, in which he realized this is a technology that man shouldn't have right now.
I've never heard that angle before.
Well, it's kind of an interesting concept. It's not something that's easily provable. It's more speculation from people who really have spent a lot of time studying the archives and letters and all the rest of it. And it makes a lot of sense, because you consider what was happening. You know, there was a lot of discord going on in Europe at the time. It was a build-up towards World War I. You can imagine from Tesla's point of view, who really thought on a world scale, you know, especially in terms of the systems he tried to manifest. Certainly AC current became a world-changing technological event, and everything that he would create in his life was always world scale in his mind. So I can imagine him being sort of hesitant at some point. Whether that was true or not, I mean, it's something we'll bring into the series, but it's another angle, right? It's another way to look at it.
And the other thing is, he went head-to-head with Edison. Let's talk about AC.
Yeah, AC current, well, as some people know, or maybe a lot of your viewers and listeners know, Tesla came to the New World as a result of being invited by one of Edison's plant managers in Europe. And when he arrived, he went straight to work for Edison. In fact, he went to the Edison offices. There was some problem with some dynamos on a ship. He went straight, he volunteered, he took some guys, he recalibrated the ship, and they actually broke the record on the transatlantic crossing with his recalibrations of their dynamos. And so he went to work for Edison, and then Edison said, well, if you can, you know, increase the efficiency of all my dynamos, I'll give you, I forget what the exact number was, 100,000 or 500,000 or $50,000 or something like that.
That's
And Tesla did it.
back then.
Yeah, it was a whack of money back then, and you know, it was just on a handshake, or might not have even been on a handshake, but Tesla went to work, did it, and then when he asked Edison for the money, Edison was just like, "What? Is this kid crazy?" I was joking, you know, like, and I can actually believe it. I mean, it's something that somebody like Edison would say to just slough off somebody who was in his sort of, you know, his cocoon of people that he would have working on various things, and then would take the credit for it. As soon as there was a breakthrough, he would go and patent those things under his own name. So I call Edison the patentless swindler, and maybe that's an unfair portrayal of him because it is a bit black and white, but to a good degree, he was the original corporate swindler as far as patents are concerned, and he would take them out from under people's thing. So he, you know, Tesla didn't like what he experienced under Edison, went out on his own, suffered a little bit for a period of time in New York where he was actually ended up digging ditches. And eventually, you know, two investors got a hold of him, and they put some money into the Tesla electric company, and they invented a whole variety of things, including, you know, a system for AC current. And it was really at that point that Westinghouse got involved, who was a major supporter of Tesla for a period of time, and they went after the contract to illuminate the Chicago World Fair exhibition in 1893. And I'm certain there were other, you know, applicants, but the two main ones, I think, from a historical point of view, were certainly Edison with his direct current system, and Tesla with his alternating current system. And this was really the place where they go head to head. And things get a little nasty too, which is interesting, because once Tesla had won the contract and they were in Chicago, Edison went to great lengths to try and scare the public as to the potential hazards of AC current, going so far as to electrocute animals on a daily basis as an exhibition demonstration. Barbaric. You know, and building it up in a great showman sense to the execution of an elephant, which is on video at some, you know, it's just a horrible thing to look at.
Yeah.
So, you know, those are stories that we'll certainly explore in the TV series, along with other things that were happening at the, you know, let's say Tesla's arrival in the United States, and then him building up to his great victory in at the World Fair would be a season, let's say, of television, 10 episodes. And within that, you get to explore other things that were happening at the Chicago World's Fair, including sort of a very interesting subplot, which would be H.H. Holmes, who was this one of the first recorded serial killers who literally bought a hotel and then custom designed it so he could murder people during the Chicago World's Fair. And interestingly enough, was later captured and hung, but for the story purposes, let's say he was executed, or one of the first people who was executed by electric chair, which really came out of that whole portrayal of AC current as dangerous. He was more or less, Edison was inventing the electric chair through that process. Mm-hmm. So there's all ways that we can sort of wrap things up into very interesting subplots and conclusions.
Now, I should tell folks, before AC current, Thomas Edison had something called direct current, DC. The problem with that is, to move it along the line, every mile or so, you would have to put another power plant.
That's correct. Yeah.
So they were going to make a ton of money building all these power plants and forcing people to buy the only electricity available. And it was just completely preposterous, because could you imagine a power plant every mile, every kilometer and a half? It's nuts.
Yeah.
So along comes Nikola Tesla and says, no, let's use AC, and now you have power plants where, you know, every, I don't know, the radius, but, you know, certainly not every mile.
Yeah, I believe it was 100 miles, and so then you have a radius of 100 square miles in every direction. So you really only need one power plant every 200 square miles to cover the two circumferences. But yeah, it makes a lot more sense, and it made a lot more sense, and it was right at that time that big industry was looking at harnessing, you know, Niagara Falls. And so there's these two things sort of chunked together really well for Tesla, and he did really well. Problem was that Edison didn't give in and kept sort of dogging the Westinghouse company for what he was doing, and then the contract that Tesla had for the amount of horsepower, I think it was every 600 horsepower that his AC current system generated, he would receive $2.50 as a royalty. And that created problems for Westinghouse. And then Tesla, I mean, these are just things that a lot of people know, but, you know, there's a lot more detail to the story that we want to tell that'll make it a little more complex and a lot less black and white, a little more human in its telling.
In the narrative, in order for any story to work, there always has to be a protagonist and an antagonist.
Yeah. I see actually numerous villains and numerous heroes in this story. Because you really have the clashing of concepts. On one side, I see Tesla with his cadre of people who really relate to him on various levels. You've got Mark Twain, who some people think was one of his best friends, whereas I tend to think they had sort of a loose affiliation, but they certainly connected on a very deep level. And what's interesting about Twain is that he's a contemporary of Rockefeller, who you know, they're pretty much the same age, so, you know, Rockefeller and Twain experienced the Civil War, and then Rockefeller, more or less, out of the kerosene industry, manifests this new industry called oil and gas, which really in itself goes head-to-head with Tesla, because...
Very much so.
You know, you've got J.P. Morgan and his banking interests and all the people who are financing the new infrastructure and the new system of banking for Wall Street, what today is Wall Street, going against the titled nobility and their old system of money and how it's managed. So there's just so many different aspects. So you've on one side you've got you know, Mark Twain as a subplot hero. You've got Dvorak. You've got what are some of the other people, like Underwood Johnson, who published the World magazine, was obviously brought Tesla into his world, and so Tesla had exposure to a lot of people who were around the world, the thinking leaders of their time, that had tentacles in every direction. So he was really at the epicenter of a sort of a nerve system that made him aware of what was going on around the world. And I consider that whole side to be more or less Team Tesla, if you will. And then on the other side, I look at Edison, but I don't see Edison as the spearhead of that sort of villainry. I see more J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, the Rothschilds, and then Edison being kind of in that group, along with Ford and you know, William Randolph Hearst, and you know, a lot of the people who were responsible for setting up and sort of addicting the world to fossil fuels. When we may have, you know, had a completely different destiny as a species on this planet, and that's really what I find fascinating about that story. Is that it was really when today's modern world and all the problems that, not all, but a good number of the problems that we have were manifest on a simple decision on whether or not to support Tesla or not.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Stacy Fry's our guest tonight, folks. He's got a new series he hopes to bring to fruition. It is called Tesla Man of Light. Yeah, that's right. And www.nightfrightshow.com. There you will find his link.
So right now what we're really doing is gathering support through our email or our newsletter, where people can get information on how this is developing, and also content on Tesla, of course. So it's an educational newsletter, and that's just simply by going to teslamanoflight.com and signing up for the emailer. And we'll keep you sort of, you know, intrigued by what's happening, and we'll be feeding you information and photographs and making other things, you know, available to you, and asking you questions, obviously, about what you think are the hot topics, not only of Tesla's time, but today, because something that someone told me, I used to be in Mayan history. I used to study that quite extensively, and getting into archaeology, it was suggested to me at one time that the study of archaeology isn't really the study of history, it's the study of history through the lens of today. So all this, the pertinent issues of today are what get imposed on, you know, historical interpretation. So 50 years ago, it was believed that the Mayans were an ambivalent, peace-loving society, and then as things changed in society and more things got dug up and they started to decipher the iconography, they realized it was just a violent melee of, you know, other places.
Sacrifice and everything else going on.
Right, yeah. But the whole New Age movement got carried away. So I'm just I'm just giving you an idea of what Tesla is like in a way, because there's a lot of mystery about him.
Big time.
And so a lot of people project their sort of contemporary wishes and hopes and ideals onto this figure because there's really nothing to contradict that idea. Now, getting deeper and more vigorously rooted in the story of Tesla, the narrative and how complex it is, especially at that time. I mean, you have so many things happening. You have the second industrial revolution really just reshaping the entire world and amplifying, geopolitical conflicts and the human condition to the point where we just launched into the 20th century, which we all know has been one of the most barbarous times in human existence.
That's where I want to go next, because what I really like what you're doing with this series is you're interweaving the narrative with all these historical figures and historical events. Now, Tesla went through 3 wars. He went through the Boer War, the First World War, and of course, he died in 1943, folks, but the Second World War leading up to that. Can we talk a little bit about that, Tesla and the war years, and how he contributed a so-called, are you ready for this, folks? A death ray, a particle beam he was working on.
Yeah, the whole concept of directed energy weapons was something that he conceived of, or it seems that he was the conceiver of that, because it is said that he was, the innovator of laser technology, and that really comes out of this idea of directed energy weapons and the ability to neutralize or melt oncoming, ships, whether they be air or sea, before they ever come close to reaching, their target destination, and that making war obsolete. Most of what Tesla did was from a humanist point of view, from a humanitarian point of view, but also from a naturalist point of view. He really loved nature. He saw a lot of his inventions conceived through his observation interaction with nature, and then obviously World War I being just a phenomenal destructive force. He would want to protect everything that he knew and loved, and that was peace and nature and all the rest of it. And so directed energy weapons really, I believe came out of the compassionate impetus to prevent war from ever happening again, by creating a weapon that was so devastating and neutralized every possible mode of attack that you were forced to reach other, or look for other ways to settle your conflicts.
In your research, this is something I was always curious about. Did he have any knowledge of the Manhattan Project?
The Manhattan Project, the nuclear project?
Was he involved? Not involved, but was he aware? Because, he's got to be walking among the elite of scientists at that point in the 40s and the 30s leading up to it. And they were already starting to work on the possibilities of it. Any idea if he was aware of it at all?
I don't think Tesla was on the inside of the scientific community at that point. In fact, I think he'd been ostracized and marginalized because of various things that occurred. First and foremost, he at one point recognized that he was receiving radio signals from Mars. And
get into that. That's a good segue.
And when he announced that to the public, he was ostracized as a kook.
As a kook.
And it's ironic because one of the most virulent opposers to that whole idea was Marconi. And it was 10 years later that Marconi confirmed Tesla's results and that they were in fact the radio signature of Mars itself. And that's really where
Can you tell that story for the folks that don't know?
It was deep into the whole radio signal process. He was looking at refining it and amplifying its ability to tune into high frequency. He was at one point trying to he was pointing it at space, and he was receiving signals on a very regular basis, and so he inferred intelligence to that signal, and he understood where it was coming from, which was Mars. The main point of telling you it is the fact that he was ostracized at that point, and more or less had been criticized so extensively from about 1904 onward for not being more practical in inventing his apparatus around his discoveries and making them practical for use. He was criticized quite extensively in that regard. because Tesla was more a pure scientist. He wanted to create new fields for other scientists to go then make practical applications for, and he just wanted to open up entirely new fields of study that would produce results far into the future. And that's really what Tesla is about. He's not interested, as Edison was in creating practical applications to his inventions that would generate money, whereas that was the ideology of all inventors at that time. And so he got ostracized. And then when he came out with these apparently wild-sounding statements, you know, we're going to do free wireless electricity. We're getting messages from Mars. You know, all this stuff in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. They don't have personal computers. They don't have space travel. They don't have, you know, all the technology that we have today and know and love. They had nothing. They had electrical streetcars once in a while. They had gas spewing and toxic spewing Model Ts. They had, you know, they were just getting into mass production. You had the Dust Bowl. You put it into context, and it does sound crazy.
At that time, and even today, you know, a lot of people are ostracized for their beliefs of extraterrestrials and things of that nature.
Sure.
Whether or not they exist or not, I don't know. I really don't. But my attitude is, you know, it's a big space out there. It'd be a waste of space if we're the only intelligent, and I use that in quotations, species out there. God forbid we are, that's for sure. But we're still shooting each other's butts off.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Folks, if you're just joining us, sit back, relax, get your feet up. We got a great ride for you tonight. Stacy Fry is here. We're talking about his new series he's trying to get off the ground called Tesla, Man of Light. www.nightfrightshow.com. There you will find Stacy's link. You can go right to his website, sign up for his newsletter, and everything that's happening with this project and surrounding it. It's an exciting project, folks. It really is. You know, you're looking at Nikola Tesla, all the mythology, all the lore, and all the facts as well. And it's all going to be driven by the historical narrative of all these famous people that were intertwined at the time, like Nelson Rockefeller, or J.P. Morgan we just mentioned, and a fellow, the Rothschilds, and a fellow I want to bring up right now, Adolf Hitler.
Oh, Adolf Hitler, yeah.
Now, I'm thinking, you know, national security, and we'll get into that in a second, because after Tesla died, Hoover grabbed all his stuff. The FBI grabbed all his papers and everything for national security, 1943. I'm thinking perhaps Adolf Hitler was aware of him, and perhaps he was making inroads trying to get him to work for the Nazis.
Yeah, there's a lot
of his Serbian background.
You know, this is where we get into the deep heart's core of conspiracy, you know, as far as what I would like to portray in this television series. One of Tesla's good friends, George Sylvester Varick, was a reporter, worked for the World newspaper, which was published by one of Tesla's very good friends, George Underwood, or is it Underwood Johnson, anyway, and his wife. And Sylvester, he had actually published a book that was very intriguing to a lot of people. He was contacted by Freud. This is in the early 1920s. So he's living and operating in New York. He gets contacted by Freud because Freud reads this book written by Varick. And already Varick is a very good friend of Tesla's because of Tesla's involvement in Underwood's life and all the writers that were around him. And so they were exposed to Tesla. And George goes to meet Freud and interview him in Europe. And then his next interview in 1923 is Hitler. And then he goes on and you know, he meets Mussolini, he meets like a whole, you look at Seifert's interview list, it's a laundry list of people that are just massive movers and shakers at that time, before and after the First World War. And then leading up to the main conflict of the Nazis and the Second World War. So yeah, I can see very early on how word would have got out between the two. Also, that's just sort of on the surface, but one of the sort of main resources I've been looking into as I've been studying, building up for this series, is an author named Anthony Sutton. He was a professor. He was very well respected until he started to get into the study of how the Americans in the American technology industry were starting to work with a lot of these, early movements in Europe, particularly for banking reasons, so that they could install their banking system. So this is really an outgrowth of J.P. Morgan and the Rothschilds and Rockefeller trying to successfully establishing the Federal Reserve in the United States and really just controlling the money in the United States, and then wanting to extend that control to other countries. So they got into investing in the Bolshevik Revolution, and then they got invested into the Nazis, and they did it in various ways. And Henry Ford even invested $1 million directly into the Nazi movement, as well as technology being passed back and forth between the United States and those areas to ensure that their ability to arm themselves was increased. And so this is a way to invest on both sides of the scale and more or less win no matter who wins. Mm-hmm. So, that's something I want to get into a little bit in the series, just to, just to explore the idea and expose people to the notion that, these things were happening. They are provable. They have been proven. The paper trail is there. And particularly this author has been very successful in my mind in demonstrating those connections and those interlocks between the technology and the industry in the United States and the upbringing of these powerful movements in Europe.
So already we've mentioned 5 or 6 subplots that could go along, and it's fabulous, isn't it, folks? Because would you tune in to watch this? I would, right away.
Yeah.
This is not reality TV in any sense. This is pure drama, and you're going to learn something from it too. Let's talk a little bit about J. Edgar, because you've got all these. What I find fascinating too is you've touched on an era where you've got all these burgeoning things. You've got J.P. Morgan, you've got the Rockefellers, you've got the Rothschilds,
Warburgs.
Oh, all these guys.
Henry Ford, Edison.
There you go.
William Randolph Hearst. Just iconic, epic, monolithic characters.
And again, coming back to what you said before, they're shaping the future. This is how it happened. This is how we got from there to here.
Exactly.
And that's what we need to know. And you've got Tesla, this kind of genius, naive, I think he's naive, trying to be exploited from all these different people.
I don't know if he's naive. Yeah, I don't know if he's naive. Naive's not really a...
How would you describe his character?
I just don't know. Okay. I think he was crippled a little bit. When I go through, his early life, I see evidence of, strong evidence of autism. I see strong evidence of bipolar issues, the hallucinatory aspects of bipolar disease, or what we call disease today. They wouldn't have had, categories for those things or really deep insights about those things back then. But Tesla was coping with them as well as he could. We also have early examples in his coping strategies and how he's dealing with these issues that more or less become very similar to the mechanisms of remote viewing, and the ability to do a lot of those things. And he's just such an interesting guy for those reasons. And then you've got, Edgar Cayce doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And you've got Rasputinov in Russia doing the exact same thing. And, it's just an interesting era where these kind of characters come up in different parts of the world, and Tesla being one of them, I think the most important one of them, because he invented real things. He didn't just disrupt system or politics or societies. He actually invented things that changed the world. So I see him as kind of the lightning rod, or literally the man of light at the center of it. Speaking of which, I just wanted to say the title, where it comes from, because it's also an interesting story, is that when Tesla was born, it's part of the family sort of mythology that he was born exactly at midnight, but who knows. And there was an electric storm going on, and the midwife was scared by it and said, boy, he's going to be a child of the storm. And the mother said, no, of light. And that's really something that I thought was beautiful, because, it's true. It's absolutely true what happened. His life, exactly that, became that. So whether that's true or not, that his mother said that or not, it's part of the family lore at this point. So that's where the title comes from.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Do you think Tesla would have been as successful, if you will, if he had stayed in Serbia, if he had stayed in the Austrian?
Absolutely not. No way. There's
way.
absolutely no way. I mean, what would he do there? It was a backward country. It was a country that was suffering under, I mean, it's where the First World War was triggered for a reason. There was a lot of oppression, a lot of, problems with, conflicting religions and conflicting ideologies. And, it's just, there's absolutely no way that he would have been successful whatsoever had he stayed in Serbia. And really, he never would have stayed in Serbia. Once his father agreed to send him to engineering school, the die was cast. He was on his way, and that was very early on in his life. I believe he was 12 or 13 when he suffered a major illness and was on his deathbed. And it was really his father coming to his deathbed, and it looked like Tesla was out, on the way out, that Tesla said, "Listen, can I go to engineering school if I live?" And his father, who wanted him to be a priest, said, "Well, fine, yes. If that's what it takes for you to come alive." And then he did. He came back from the dead, because, and that really, to me, what I underlined in that story is the importance and meaning of meaning in life. He knew what he wanted to do, but he never got outward reinforcement for that or support for that from the most important people in his life, meaning his father and his mother, until he was almost dead. And then it was at that moment that they finally allowed him to recognize and fulfill his fate. And that's what brought him back from the dead.
And I think that's a key factor in this series, because I think a lot of people will be able to identify with that.
Exactly. This is my point exactly. Yeah. It's not about the rags to riches. It's about for me, it's deeper than that. The story I just told you is about somebody coming to terms with why they're really here on planet Earth. For 90% of the people, or 99% of the people in the world, they go through a cookie cutter existence because it's how they are told they have to survive. But deep down, they know somewhere in there that this is not what they really want to do or who they really are, and then they're lost. And so if we're talking about transformation of society now, in order for the world to be prepared for the technology that Tesla was creating then, so that it isn't so overly destructive, I think that's one of the key aspects, is that we come to terms with who we really are. When I was reading, go ahead.
I was going to say, is it also a coming of age of the new world?
Yeah, it is about the new coming age of new world, because it didn't occur to me right away, but once I was watching 1492, Ridley Scott film.
Sure.
Very recently, like about 2 weeks ago. And I didn't know, and the movie underlined the fact that Christopher Columbus was not attributed with finding the New World. He was politically out of favor. When he got to what is modern-day Cuba and set things up, he treated the nobles in a way that they didn't appreciate, and so he got ostracized and really was written out of history. And it wasn't for about another 125 years that people even realized, or that academics even resurfaced the fact that he had found the New World. Whereas today, we think of him as always having been accredited with that. And so here we are with Tesla, same story, changes the world, literally written out of history. It's not taught in schools, right?
That's right.
That's a fundamental faux pas, in my opinion. He's not taught about in schools. It's astonishing to me that the academic society has gone that far, that they wouldn't reinstate him as a person of interest for an academic curriculum in America. But anyway, now we're at the beginning point of that resuscitation of what Tesla means to the modern world. And it's coming of age at that time. And, it overtaking Europe as sort of the leader in, I think the United States have been a leader already since the Civil War, but, because they'd abolished slavery. And that was a leading change for sure. And it's also something I want to get into in subplot, because I also think at that time, you know, the black community, the African American community in the United States was finally, at least in that part of the world, in New York and in the eastern, northern cities, were actually starting to get some respect in society and actually able to operate. So that's something I want to bring into. So as you can see, it's really tough to kind of encapsulate the series.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Did he have any love interests?
Yeah, this is funny because people think Tesla was like this monk. When he was in Europe, he was a gambling sex addict.
Ah, see, I didn't know this.
He paid for sex. He had sex with many, many women. He was debaucherous. And that was in his early years. After his first couple of years in university, he had sort of fallen out of love with the whole academic system and how it was treating his new ideas. Particularly, I would say the linchpin of that is when his professor more or less mocked him for coming up with even the notion that alternating current was a possibility. And then he started to fall out of love with the academic system, went into a life of pleasure, which was the exact opposite of his upbringing and the exact opposite of his personal values and all the rest of it, but he had to go through it. And it was during that time that he spent a lot of time carousing and staying up all night and gambling and playing pool and doing all the rest of it. It really wasn't until until his father died. His father actually came and tried to retrieve him in Europe, saying, "Listen, come back home and get back on your feet. You're kind of living a life that you shouldn't be living." And Tesla said no. And then his father went back and literally died as soon as he got back. And I think it was at that point that Tesla sort of woke up out of this sort of life of pleasure, which was not doing him any service and certainly wasn't propelling him forward in his work, that he got focused. And then when he came to America, as I was talking about Underwood, the publisher, he had a wife that it is said Tesla had a platonic love relationship with. There's also Sandra Bernhard, who was a popular, theater actress at the time, who also went on to do, films for a great many years. That supposedly Tesla had a very sexual relationship, romantic and sexual. So it's something that we'll explore in the series. I can't give you all the answers right now because we haven't spent the $200,000 that we expect to spend on the story Bible, where we'll be obviously engaging a series of experts and then really laying out all the detailed aspects of the possible stories. But it is pretty clear from speaking with some of these people and looking into some of their books that he had romantic interests, but at some point he gave those up and really just dedicated himself to his work completely. And I believe that was pretty much around the time that he struck out on his own after suffering sort of street life, literally. Once he left Edison, and for 9 months he went through one of the toughest periods in his life, where the skinny, fragile, sickly fellow was digging ditches in New York. So you can imagine what that did to his lifestyle and also to his mindset and his willingness to do anything necessary to pull himself out of it and go back to a meaningful life. So I think that, at that point he'd pretty much severed ties with a lot of the lifestyle and romantic aspirations he'd had earlier.
Before the hour runs out, I want to touch on J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, you were mentioning him.
Yeah, I want to bring that up before the hour runs out.
This is the thing. I mean, when Tesla was ostracized, I think after during Wardenclyffe, it was pretty much indicated, or it got out, that he was doing wireless free energy and what could happen to the world in that scenario. And, it obviously brings up a lot of issues. In a lot of different interest groups' minds, whether it be oil and gas, national security, public health, and you name it, right? And so he was on a lot of people's radar at that point. And certainly the FBI became one of them. And the FBI more or less founding itself right at that time, right as Wardenclyffe is being built and or being torn down, and Hoover being at the spearhead of that, and national security being his number one thing, and his favorite thing to do being opening files on people, certainly he would have had a very extensive dossier on him, and also because of his affiliations with the fellow I was telling you about, George Sylvester Varick, and Sylvester's proximity to Hitler, and you name it. You know, the ties go out, right? I mean, if you're at any level of high society at any point in history, at any time, and particularly in New York, your ties go everywhere.
That's right. Yeah.
And so he would have been a special person of interest from the FBI's point of view, not only at the latter part of his life, but the moment that he became suspect in the process of building up Wardenclyffe and then it being torn down.
Did Hoover fear that he was a Bolshevik, if you will, that he was a communist? Was there any fear of that ever?
Okay, there's two ways I want to treat that. First, I want to get into that a little more in the storyline, because I do think he was approached. I think he was approached on several projects, to help the war effort, and that because he was a pacifist and because he didn't believe in war, he declined. And so he was threatened with the possibility of being branded a enemy of the United States and having his citizenship revoked. And then that becoming the leverage to yes, get him involved in other things, or at least to allow his information to pass through the hands of a team assigned to him by the FBI and other interest groups, whether it be the military or the FBI. I also see it, again, Tesla's sort of thought process was so far-reaching into the future. I mean, we know today for certain that the directed energy weapons that he was discussing, and that even Mark Twain was laughing and joking about when Twain was in Europe, meeting with these German princes, saying, "Hey, give me the plans to your doomsday device, and I'll sell them for you here in Europe." And we're talking about German princes at this point. This is pre-World War I. Yeah. So certainly there would have been a lot of interest in what Tesla was up to from a point of view of national security.
Without question. Without question.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Folks, Stacy James Fry is our guest tonight, and we're talking about Nikola Tesla. He's got a TV show series he's trying to get off the ground, and with good solid stories behind it, subplots everywhere. It's kind of a coming of age of America too, of the new world, if you will. And Nikola Tesla takes us right through that. All these incredible historical people, all these incredible historical situations that you can derive a narrative from, something that's not only entertaining, educational as well. And that's what really entices me, especially with all the darn reality shows that are on right now. That just, I don't know what's going on, but lack of imagination perhaps. And this is something that I think Nikola Tesla personifies. I think that's something absolutely that we can look to Nikola Tesla and talk about a guy that, quote unquote, thought out of the box. www.nightfrightshow.com. There you'll find Stacy's contact information. You can go to his website, sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter will give you all the information that you need to find out about how the series is progressing. Now, do you see the show lasting 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually did plot it out in my mind at one point, just early on, how I would sort of partition the whole series.
Yeah.
And certainly I see the first 2 seasons leading up to his conquest of Edison. And that just being the springboard for really what came later, which was Colorado and then Wardenclyffe, which really could cover, if we get into all the subplots that we've been discussing, it could last, that portion of it could last just, 4, 5, 6 years. Wow. Because it's so complex. Yeah. I mean, here's another subplot that I didn't even discuss with you that I'm just researching now that I find fascinating. There was a book that was published 14 years before the Titanic was financed It's called the Sinking of a Titan, or the something of that nature. Again, I'm just starting to research this. So I found it on the net, or somebody told me about it. It was very interesting. So here's this book. It's a carbon copy of what happened 14, 15 years later with the sinking of the Titanic.
Wow.
And it predates the sinking of the Titanic by that many years. But not only does it talk about the sinking of Titanic, it talks about where it sunk, the exact coordinates.
Really?
Yeah. And, there's just some very funky sort of coincidences there. And then, people who are conspiracy theorists extrapolate and go, it's interesting because JP Morgan is the company with his European contacts that financed the building of the Titanic. They built 2 of them. Yep. And one sunk. He was paid an enormous amount of money through the insurance policy. And what's really interesting about what conspiracy theorists have done with that is that they've looked at the people who were invited onto the Titanic and the people who ended up on the Titanic, and then therefore the people who died in the Titanic as a result. And it's funny because the people who were all invited on the Titanic didn't all make it onto the Titanic. And the people who didn't make it onto the Titanic have really close ties to JP Morgan and their whole group of people who established the Federal Reserve. The people who died are a good number of those people who are factually known to have been opposed to the idea of the Federal Reserve being established in the United States. And a lot of old money from Europe being sort of accumulated and saying, no, we're not going to participate in that. So, there's just a subplot that one can get into that, I'm not saying it's true or not. That's not the point of this series, because I'm not going to say I know anything.
No, actually, it's a series. It's a television series.
It's a drama. It's not a documentary. It's a
Yeah.
dramatically scripted, acted television series. That's what a lot of people don't get, is they think I'm immediately going into a documentary series. No, it's scripted television, like House of Cards, Game of Thrones, Downton Abbey, whatever. That. If you
We're going to have to wrap up, my friend. Stacy Fry's been our guest tonight, folks. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now, nightfrightshow.com.